The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. A shrill metallic sound that sliced through the silence of my small bedroom. I reached out, my hand trembling more from dread than from age. When I pressed the phone to my ear, my son's voice came cold and sharp, like a blade against skin. "Mom," he said, without hesitation, "if you don't sign the power of attorney tomorrow, don't expect to see your grandson again." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My lips parted, but no sound came out. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I loosened my grip, and it slipped from my fingers, landing on the wooden nightstand with a dull thud. The echo lingered in the dark. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second stabbed deeper. Tick, your son just threatened you. Tick, you might never see your grandchild again. Tick, you are not a mother anymore, just an obstacle. I pressed both hands against my chest, trying to steady the wild rhythm of my heart. The ceiling lamp buzzed softly above me, its pale light turning the walls into prison bars. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to shout his name, but the words died in my mouth. "Sign it, Mom." His voice still echoed in my head. Not a plea, a command, a transaction. I bent down, picked up the phone, and pressed it to my ear again, but the line was already dead. The final click was louder than any slam of a door. I sat there, staring at the shadows stretching across the carpet. My eyes fell on the framed photograph on the dresser. Me, holding him as a boy, his smile wide and careless, my arm wrapped tightly around him as if nothing in the world could separate us. Now, decades later, the same boy, my boy, was holding my love hostage, demanding my signature like ransom. My body shook. The blanket slid from my lap to the floor, pooling like a puddle of forgotten warmth. I curled my fingers into fists until my nails cut into my palms, needing the sting to remind me I was still real, still alive. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. It wasn't sudden, like glass shattering. It was slow, like ice splitting across a frozen lake, groaning under pressure. I whispered into the dark, "Why, Michael? Why would you do this to me?" My own voice startled me. It sounded so small, so fragile, as if it belonged to a stranger. The house, once a haven, felt foreign, hostile. Every corner seemed to echo with betrayal. The silence mocked me. The sofa where I once sewed his school uniforms, the kitchen table where I counted pennies to pay for his college tuition, the very walls that had witnessed every sacrifice. And now, all of it reduced to one brutal sentence: sign the papers, or lose your grandson. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the chair by the window, watching the moon slide across the sky. Each hour passed like a stone dragging across my chest. At dawn, when the first light filtered through the blinds, I knew something had changed forever. It was the moment I understood the truth. They didn't see me as a mother anymore, not as the woman who gave them life, not as the hands that stitched their wounds or the arms that carried their dreams. To them, I was nothing but a wallet with a pulse, and I was about to learn the final, most brutal lesson of my life. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 78 years old, and until that night, I believed that love, my love, could buy me a place in my children's hearts. I keep the old expense ledger on the top shelf of my dresser. The leather cover is cracked, the corners softened by 4 decades of use. Once, it was my treasure. I would open it with pride, filling its neat columns with every penny saved, every bill paid, every small victory that kept my family afloat. Now, when I touch it, my fingers recoil. The pages smell of dust and disinfectant, the scent of hospitals that never quite left my hands. Each line, each number, feels like a scar I carved into myself. I became a nurse when I was 22. 40 years of double shifts, endless nights, and holidays spent under fluorescent lights. I can still hear the steady beep of heart monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum floors. My body learned to move on coffee and adrenaline. My heart learned to quiet its own needs so I could meet everyone else's. For years, every paycheck went straight into survival. Rent first, then food, then, whatever was left, I tucked away in the ledger for my children's future. I remember December 1979. The electricity bill was $85. It had rained all week, and the envelope arrived damp, the ink smudged. I slipped it into a plastic bag before heading to the night shift, the paper cold and clammy in my pocket. I told myself, "Pay it first, Margaret. Keep the lights on for the boys." And so I did, month after month, year after year. When Michael was accepted to university, the tuition fees looked impossible. $12,000 for his first year alone. I wrote the check with shaking hands, the pen digging a groove into the paper. My bank account nearly bled dry that day, but when I mailed the envelope, I whispered, "It's worth it. He'll have what I never did." Later, when David lost his job, I began sending him $200 every month. Just until he found work again, I told myself. But just until became years. Every first of the month, I would fold the bills into an envelope, write his name, and leave it in the mailbox. I remember the hollow feeling in my chest each time the envelope disappeared. The ledger kept track of it all. Pages filled with notes. Medical bills for Michael, $12,000. T. David's rent, $200. Groceries, when Anna was pregnant, $150. At first, the numbers gave me pride. Proof that I was providing, protecting, building. But slowly, the ink turned to chains. Each line was another piece of myself given away. Each check was a fragment of my freedom torn off and handed to someone else. I look back now, and I see how naive I was. I told myself, sacrifice was love. That if I gave enough money, time, health, they would understand, and they would love me back. But love cannot be bought. Still, at the time, I didn't know that. I was too busy writing checks, wiping tears, working through back pain, making sure the fridge was always full when they came home. Sometimes I wonder, did I ever live for myself at all? There were signs, of course. Little cracks that I ignored. Michael once joked, when I refused to buy him a second car, "Mom, you'll live forever, so we won't have to worry about retirement. You're our insurance policy." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but the words sank deep. Another time, when I handed David his rent envelope, he frowned. "Is this all?" he asked, as if the money had sprung from a bottomless well instead of my aching hands. And Anna, my daughter-in-law, wrinkled her nose when she hugged me after work. "You smell like bleach again, Mom. Hospitals never leave you, do they?" Her tone was light, but the shadow in her eyes was cold. Small things, easy to dismiss. Yet each one planted a seed of unease inside me. And still, I kept writing. I remember sitting at the kitchen table late one night, ledger open, pen poised. I stared at the numbers. 40 years of labor, reduced to ink and debt and sacrifice. My hand shook as I wrote another check. I whispered to myself, "I am not giving them money. I am giving them love. They'll see that someday. SS." But the truth, one I refused to face, was that I was writing myself into debt to my own family, turning into their creditor and debtor all at once. I had created the perfect illusion that my worth as a mother equaled the size of my checks. The ledger lies open in front of me now, its pages yellowed. I trace the faded ink with my finger and feel sick. I wrote these lines, I whisper, and each one was a knife against my own heart. The memory burns. The numbers are still there. 40 years of sacrifice, 12,000 in medical bills, 200 each month for years. Proof not of love received, but of love drained. And worst of all, I handed them the knife myself. It was a Tuesday morning. Ordinary in every way. Sunlight leaking through the curtains, the kettle hissing on the stove, the faint smell of coffee filling the air. I sat at the kitchen table, ledger in front of me, laptop open. My hands hovered above the keyboard as I logged into my bank account. The numbers appeared on the screen. Balance, 4726. My breath caught. I blinked, refreshed the page. Same number. $47. After 40 years of work, after a lifetime of sacrifice, after paying every bill, every tuition, every just this once request, this was all I had left. The coffee in my cup turned bitter in my mouth. I set it down, porcelain clinking against the table. My palms were damp, my fingers icy. $47. That's it. That's all I am worth now. I stared at the ledger lying open beside me. Last month's entry was there. Automatic transfer. David's rent, $200. Below it, allowance for Michael, $300. A line after line, proof of my devotion, my blindness. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. If I keep going like this, I will die as a shadow. If I stop, I may lose my children. Which death do I choose? The questions beat inside my skull like fists against a locked door. Do I want to spend the rest of my life feeding mouths that curse me when I can't give more? Do. I want to die poor, invisible, a ghost with empty pockets. Do I want my last memory of motherhood to be this? An open ledger and a drained account? 2S ass. Or do I dare to stand for myself, even if it means standing alone? My throat tightened. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smudging the ink on the page. I reached for the mouse. The bank's website glowed cold blue on the screen. My cursor hovered over the Scheduled Transfers tab. My hand trembled so hard, I had to press it flat against the desk to steady it. I clicked. A list appeared. Every month, the same amounts, the same drains on my life. My heart pounded in my ears. My breathing turned shallow, ragged. I moved the cursor to the small red button that read, Cancel. For a second, I froze. I thought of Michael's voice, low and sharp. Mom, sign it. Or forget your grandson. I thought of David's frown. Is this all? I thought of Anna's cold eyes when she smelled bleach on my uniform. If I canceled, I risked losing them all. Their love, their visits, their children's laughter. But if I didn't, I risked losing myself. My finger pressed down. Click. The sound was soft, almost nothing, but it reverberated through my chest like thunder. The screen refreshed. Transfer canceled. It's. I stared, hardly believing. Then, I leaned back in my chair, my breath coming fast, hot tears sliding down my cheeks. The kitchen clock ticked on. The kettle had gone silent. The world hadn't ended. But something had shifted. I whispered into the empty room. No more. Not like this. For the first time in years, my voice didn't sound small. I stood, wiped my hands on my skirt, and closed the ledger. The cover snapped shut with a weighty thud. That sound was my line in the sand. I knew what it meant. There would be phone calls, accusations, maybe even threats. I might be branded ungrateful, cruel, selfish. I might lose my children entirely. But the price of continuing was far greater. I would lose myself, my dignity, my very right to exist as more than a bank account with gray hair. And I was done with that. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the last tear from my cheek. My voice in my head grew harder, clearer. I am 78 years old. I have worked for 40 years. I have earned the right to stand tall. I am not their servant. I am not their wallet. I am Margaret Wilson, and I will no longer fund my own erasure. That morning, something inside me shifted forever. I had been the victim, the giver, the shadow. But with one trembling click, I chose myself. It was the first time I stood on my own side, against the ungrateful children I had raised, and for the woman I still was. The knock came just after lunch. A sharp, hurried rapping that rattled the new lock I had installed only days earlier. I froze in the kitchen, teacup trembling in my hand, the porcelain rim tapping against the saucer. I knew that knock. My heart sank before I even opened the door. When I turned the knob, Michael and Anna were already stepping inside, their coats still on, their eyes colder than the winter wind behind them. Michael carried a folder tucked under his arm, thick with papers. Anna's heels clicked against the hardwood, too loud for this small, suffocating house. The living room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy. They sat down on the sofa as if they owned it, the folder placed between us on the coffee table. I lowered myself into the chair opposite, my knees stiff, my hands gripping the armrests to keep them from shaking. No one spoke at first, only the creak of the old ceiling fan above us and the faint tick of the wall clock. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk about the money." His tone was calm, practiced. Anna leaned forward, her smile too sweet, like frosting hiding poison. "For your own good," she said softly. "It would be better if you let us handle things now. You're not as sharp as you used to be." The word sliced through me. Not as sharp. I forced my lips into a thin line, refusing to flinch. Michael opened the folder. Pages rustled, white sheets sliding like knives across each other. "Here," he said, pushing the papers toward me. "It's simple. A power of attorney. Sign it, and we'll make sure you're comfortable for the rest of your life." I stared at the documents. The black ink swam before my eyes. My tea sat untouched beside me, steam curling upward like a ghost. I looked up at my son. "You think I need you to keep me comfortable?" His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've leaned on us long enough." My breath caught. Leaned on them? 40 years of paychecks, sleepless nights, broken bones from double shifts, and he dared to say I had leaned on him? Anna's voice slid into the silence. "You've always said family means helping each other. We're only trying to help." I lifted my eyes to hers. Help doesn't come with a signature. Michael's patience snapped. He slammed his palm against the folder, the papers jumping under his hand. "You owe us. Everything you have is because we let you live with us, because we put up with." "Enough," I cut in, my voice trembling but firm. My hand gripped the chair so hard, my knuckles turned white. The room fell silent again. Only our breathing filled the space. Michael's sharp and angry, Anna's measured and cold, mine ragged but steadying. Then, Michael leaned closer, his face inches from mine. "If you don't sign, Mom, we'll have no choice. We'll take this to court. You'll lose anyway. Better to do it now, quietly." There it was. The threat, bare and ugly. Something inside me shifted. My body shook, yes. But my voice no longer did. "You think I keep this money for you?" I asked, slowly, each word deliberate. "This is my sweat, my 40 years, my back bent, my hands raw. Not a prize for you to snatch." Michael's face hardened. "We're your children. If not us, then who?" I stood. My knees cracked, but I stood tall. My hand pressed flat against the table, steadying me. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "I am not a shadow you can order around. I am not a machine that spits out cash when you knock on my door." My voice rose, sharp, cutting through the air. "I am your mother. But I will not be your wallet." Anna shifted uncomfortably, her painted nails tapping the arm of the sofa. Michael's eyes flickered, just for a moment, something like doubt breaking through the fury. But the mask returned. He shoved the folder closer to me. "Think carefully, Mom. Refuse now, and you'll regret it." My chest tightened, but not with fear, with fire. I pushed the folder back across the table. The papers slid off the edge and landed on the carpet with a soft, final thud. My voice was clear. "I will not sign. Not now. Not ever." Michael's face flushed red. He stood abruptly, the sofa groaning under his weight. Anna rose too, gathering her coat. Fine, he spat. But don't come crying to us when you have nothing left. Ooh. I straightened my back. I already have nothing left, Michael. Except myself. And that is enough. Silence. Heavy, suffocating. Then, the slam of the door. Their footsteps retreated down the walkway, the sound fading into the distance. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I lowered myself back into the chair, my whole body trembling. My hands shook so hard, I could barely lift the teacup. I took a sip anyway. The tea had gone cold, bitter, but it burned its way down my throat like victory. For the first time in years, I felt the faint spark of something new inside me. Not peace. Not yet. But fire. A small flame, fragile, determined. I whispered into the empty room, my voice hoarse but steady. I am not your shadow. I am not your bank. I am Margaret Wilson. And though my body shook, my heart stood taller than it ever had before. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, just after the mailman's footsteps faded down the sidewalk. It was heavier than the others, stiff and official. My name printed in a stern black font that drained the color from the morning. I stood at the kitchen counter, a butter knife still slick with jam in my hand, and felt the paper's weight tip the whole day into darkness. I slid it open. The seal cracked like a knuckle. Liking. Notice of petition. A. A court date. A list of allegations. The words slid across my vision, oily and unreal. Sin capacity. Mismanagement. Urgent need for appointed agents. My heart pounded so hard, the margins seemed to ripple. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I held the papers over the sink because suddenly, I was afraid I'd drop them, and the thought of those lies touching my kitchen table made my skin crawl. By the time I reached the last page, my hands shook so badly the paper rustled like leaves. There, in tidy bullet points, was the case they were building. That I had been confused at the bank on the June 3rd, 10:14 a.m. to S. That I had lost track of days, in conversation at the pharmacy on the July 21st, that I had made erratic transactions in the past 3 months and needed protection from myself. Protection. I pressed my palm to the counter to steady myself. The tea kettle began to whine, a thin, miserable sound, and I realized I had turned on the burner without noticing. I switched it off. The house fell quiet again, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, the wary creak of the new lock on the front door settling in the heat. I wasn't just losing my family now. I was being paraded, publicly, as a woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. That afternoon, I went to the bank with the letter in my purse and the ledger under my arm. The floor's polished tiles threw back hard light. It smelled like carpet cleaner and lemons. I need to review my recent transactions, I told the clerk, a young man with kind eyes that flicked to my hands, then to the official notice I was gripping. All of them. The automatic transfers I canceled last week show me they're gone. He led me to a desk and pulled up my account. The glow of the screen made his face look strangely gentle. There, he said, tapping. Scheduled transfer canceled. September 13, 9006 a.m. My breath eased, a fraction. But he scrolled, and my stomach lurched. 2 withdrawals I didn't recognize sat like black stones in the list. $400 on $400, RSX Timber 10s, 25 on fax dollars on fax dollars. ASX Denver 11, labeled Olive Sextens. The branch wasn't mine. The timestamps were early morning, when I was always home, watering the basil pots and reading the paper. I felt the blood rush from my head. That's not me, I said. The words came out too fast. The clerk frowned. We can flag them, he offered carefully. There's also a security camera at that ATM. We can request footage. A tremor ran through me. Fear, then fury, then a cold, focusing calm. I hadn't felt since the day I clicked cancel. Please do, I said. Today. Outside, the wind had risen, scraping dry leaves along the curb. My reflection in the branch's wide windows looked older than it had that morning, but my jaw was set. I pressed the envelope to my chest, as if it might bolt away. At the pharmacist's, the bell over the door tinkled. Mrs. Chen peered up from behind the counter, her glasses sliding down her nose. Mrs. Wilson, she greeted me, then paused. Are you okay? I need a copy of the receipt from July 21st, I said. 10:30 a.m., I picked up blood pressure medication. My voice steadied as I spoke. Facts calmed me. Dates, times, numbers, the language of my ledger. She printed the record and slid it across the counter. Is something wrong? I may need you to remember that I wasn't confused that day, I said, and hated that my voice wavered on confused. Just quiet. Tired. She nodded once, slowly. You were polite, she said. You always are. You corrected me when I misread the dosage. Then, more softly, I'll tell anyone who asks. On the Thursday, the news had made its way around the neighborhood like a cold. At the corner store, 2 women fell silent when I walked in. One offered me a quick, bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Another studied the floor, as if counting tiles. By evening, I heard the first ugly version of the story through my living room window, thin voices drifting from the sidewalk as dusk folded down over the block. Poor thing. It happens at that age. Well, her kids must have their reasons. No one sues their own mother lightly. The words settled in the hedges like ash. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open and a pen in my hand. But I didn't write. I traced old entries instead. January, Michael's tuition. C. March, David's rent. C. April, groceries for Anna. The ink had browned over the years. It looked like pressed leaves. The knock came just past 9. Not the angry rapping from before. This was careful, almost apologetic. I opened the door to find Mr. Alvarez from 2 houses down, his cap clutched nervously. He's a widower with a slow gait and a garden that somehow survives every bad winter. Behind him stood Rosa Cash, who runs the little cafe on the corner, her apron dusted with flour. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Alvarez said, voice gentle. We heard some talk. He glanced at the envelope on my hall table, then back to my face. You are not alone. Rosa stepped forward, her eyes fierce. I saw Michael at the ATM on Maple, she said without ceremony. Monday morning, early. He didn't see me. I was walking to the bakery. I thought it was strange because he doesn't live around here anymore. She hesitated. Do you need me to say that to someone official? My throat tightened. Yes, I managed. I might. They stayed 10 minutes, no longer, sensing my exhaustion, and when I closed the door, I pressed my forehead to the cool wood. The new lock clicked home with a sound that, for the first time, comforted me. The next morning, a small white business card was tucked under my doormat. No Bennett, attorney at law. On the back, a neat cursive note. Rosa says you may call. I specialize in elder coercion cases. Clara, I called. Her office smelled faintly of rain and copier toner. She was younger than I expected. Mid-30s maybe? But there was nothing unsteady about her. She listened more than she spoke, her questions precise, unsparing but never unkind. When I finished, she laced her fingers together and said, We fight. I must have blinked. First, she continued, we gather. You've already started, which helps. Pharmacy receipt, bank flags. We'll subpoena the ATM footage. We'll also get the locksmith's invoice. The new lock proves concern, not confusion. She paused. And we'll need character witnesses. People who see you every week and can speak to your clarity. Mr. Alvarez, I said. Rosa. She nodded. Good. Also, your doctor. We'll request a cognitive assessment. Not because you need it, but because we don't let them frame the story. A quiet relief unknotted somewhere beneath my ribs. Thank you, I said, and meant it with my whole body. Clara tapped the petition. Their strategy is textbook, she said. Paint you as fragile, then claim guardianship over your assets. The for your own good line is always the sugar that coats the poison. I flinched at the phrase, for your own good, hearing Anna's voice. They'll bring witnesses, I said. People to say I'm forgetful. They will, Clara agreed. We'll bring truth. On a Saturday, the escalation arrived clean and sharp. A man in a crisp suit delivered another envelope. Supplemental affidavits. Inside were statements. One from Mr. Dalton, the building's handyman, who claimed I'd forgotten to pay for a minor repair. I hadn't. The ledger's a May 5D entry proved it. Another from a woman at the church thrift sale who swore I'd wandered the aisles looking lost. I had been searching for a blue cardigan that matched an old skirt. I left with a cake stand instead. The worst was a sworn statement from a nurse at my old hospital who hadn't worked in my ward, claiming I'd called her by the wrong name 3 times in a row during a visit only weeks ago. The hospital's visitor log would show I hadn't been there at all that day. Lies, braided into a rope they meant to throw around my neck. I took the stack to Clara. She read quickly, her mouth flattening. We'll counter each point, she said. Receipts, logs, neighbors, camera. We won't get lost in outrage. We'll build. Her calm steadied me. It also exhausted me. Fighting isn't just fear. It's labor. We fell into a rhythm. Journée. Tense mornings of collecting, calling, subpoenaing, breathing, afternoons where life insisted on itself in small ways. I watered the basil. I mended a loose button on my gray cardigan. I copied recipes Rosa scribbled for me on the backs of pastry order slips. Lemon loaf, almond biscotti. In the evenings, I walked to the corner and back, past Mr. Stir. Alvarez's roses, which had started a late bloom, stubborn and beautiful. And then, inevitably, another wave. On Mondays, Clara called. We got the ATM footage. At her office, we watched it on a small screen. The timestamp read, September 10, 6:41 a.m. The camera angle was bad, too high, too wide, but it was enough. There he was. Michael, shoulders hunched, cap low, withdrawing cash. He didn't look up. My stomach turned, not with surprise, but with a grief so pure it scraped me hollow. Clara paused the frame and exhaled. This helps, she said softly. She didn't touch my arm. I was grateful for that. Back home, the neighborhood hum had softened, just a little. People still looked, but some looks had changed, from suspicion to something more complicated. Mr. Dalton couldn't meet my eyes at all. That night, as I set a cup of chamomile tea on the table, the phone rang. David She D. Falwer. Mom, he said, too brightly. How are you? I'm well, I said, because that was easier than telling him the truth. That I was tired. That my bones felt full of rain. Cleared his throat. Listen, about the case, it's just procedure. Michael says it'll all smooth out if you sign. No one wants a scene. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. It twined like a pale ribbon and disappeared. No, I said. Mom, he tried again, now impatient, the old tone I knew too well. Don't be dramatic. There are withdrawals in my account I did not make, I said. There are lies and affidavits. If you want to call that dramatic, you can. I call it theft. Silence fanned out between us, wide and cold. I guess we'll see you in court, David said, brittle now. He hung up. I sat very still, listening to the dial tone's final, flat refusal. When it stopped, the house seemed to shiver into quiet. My tea had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. 2 days later, the Wise Locksmith invoice arrived by email, stamped and tidy. September 8, 32 p.m. I printed it, slid it into a folder that was beginning to look too much like Michael's. Beside it, I placed Mrs. Briss's, Chen's receipt, and a note from Mr. Alvarez, dated, signed, simple. I see Margaret Wilson most mornings watering her plants. We talk about the weather and city news. She is clear and oriented. Rosa's statement was fiercer. I saw Michael at the Maple ATM 6:40 a.m. Monday. He withdrew cash. Margaret was not there, and could not be, because I also saw her at 7:05 a.m., buying a loaf at my cafe. She'd tucked a printed receipt behind it. G7,006,201 a.m. Cecia smiled when she saw the stack. You're a very good client, she said. Most people collapse here. You build. Building is what I know, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I built them. Now I build me. Still, the nights were long. Every time the wind rose, I jolted, expecting another knock, another envelope. Sleep came in thin scraps. Some mornings, I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth, fear's aftertaste. And yet, there were the small mercies. Rosa sending over a paper bag with 2 glazed buns and a note, for strength, Mr. Strength. Alvarez leaving a bundle of rosemary on my stoop. The pharmacist waving off payment for a bottle of headache pills with a quiet, next time. Those moments stitched me together when the paperwork tried to pull me apart. On a Fridays, Clara prepared me for what would come. They'll push a cognitive test at the earliest hearing, she said. We'll be ready. Your doctor is on board. She looked up from her notes. Are you scared? Yes, I said. And I'm angry. And I'm tired of being told that those feelings make me unfit. Her mouth tilted, almost a smile. Good, she said. Anger, in the right dose, fuels clarity. When I stepped out of her office, the late sun had warmed the sidewalk. A child tugged his mother's hand, laughing. And for a moment I saw Michael at 5, red sneakers flashing. The memory slid past like a shadow of a bird. There, then gone. That evening, as I closed the curtains, the phone buzzed again. A number I didn't know. I answered. A woman's voice, strained and high. Mrs. Wilson? This is… Well, I can't say my name. I work with someone who signed one of those papers. They told me what to write. It wasn't true. I'm sorry. A breath. I'm willing to say that formally, but I'm scared. My hand tightened around the phone. You'll be protected, I said, hoping it was true. Call this number. I read her Clara's office line. You did the right thing. When the call ended, I stood in the dim room, the handset still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Relief and dread braided together. This petition had started as a blunt instrument. It had become something else. A mirror held too close. In it, I saw the lines I had written into my life. Each check, each forgiveness, each silence. I could not rewrite the past. But I could write what came next. That night, sleep found me for a few clean hours. I woke before dawn and made coffee. The house was quiet, washed in blue. I opened the ledger again, not to tally or to trace, but to lay a hand on the cover the way one might on an old friend's shoulder. I'm taking you to the courthouse, I told it, not as proof of what I owe them, as proof of what I gave. The kettle clicked off. Somewhere outside, a newspaper thumped onto a neighbor's step. Ordinary sounds. A stitched-together morning. And still, the question that had hummed at the edges of every task rose up, insistent and electric. When we stand in that courtroom, when truth faces the lies they've polished, will the judge see me as I am, or as the story they've written for me? I set the cup down, steady. We'll find out, I said to the empty room. We'll make them see. It was late afternoon when I pulled Michael's coat from the back of the chair. He had forgotten it after his last visit, storming out too quickly to notice. I meant only to hang it on the rack, to fold it neatly, and remind myself that even anger should not erase manners. The coat was heavier than it looked. As I lifted it, something shifted inside the pocket with a papery whisper. I slipped my hand in, expecting a receipt or an old grocery list. What I drew out was a folded document. Thick, crisp. My name printed on the first line. My breath snagged. I unfolded it slowly, my fingertips prickling. The paper was cool against my skin, almost damp with the chill of betrayal. Black ink sprawled across the page. General Power of Attorney. And there, staring back at me in neat cursive, was my own name. My signature. Except, it wasn't mine. The curve of the M was too wide, the W slanted wrong. Whoever had forged it had studied me closely, but not closely enough. My hand flew to my chest. My heart thundered against my ribs, so loud it drowned out the ticking clock on the mantel. For a moment, I swayed. The room seemed to tilt, the walls leaning in, the carpet rising like water. My knees locked, forcing me to stay upright. They forged me. They forged me. My eyes burned as I read the lines. It gave Michael complete control over my accounts, my property, every choice I might make. With one flourish of ink, they had written me out of my own life. I clutched the paper tighter. My hands trembled so violently that the sheet rattled. "How could you?" I whispered into the empty room. "You are my blood." I thought of nights at the hospital when Michael was a child and I worked double shifts to pay for his braces. I thought of the check I wrote for his first year of college, the ink still wet with hope. And now, here was the price of all that sacrifice. My freedom, reduced to a forgery. The betrayal was so sharp, it stole the air from my lungs. My throat constricted, my mouth dry. I pressed the back of my hand to my lips, fighting the nausea that rose like a wave. My mind tumbled through questions, jagged and quick. Did he leave it here by accident? Or was I meant to find it? If this paper already exists, how many others are there? Pass, Ass AG. Will a judge believe it's fake, or will they believe the son over the mother? HS. How much of my life have I already lost without knowing? I sat down heavily on the edge of the sofa, the paper still in my hand. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder, each second hammering the truth deeper. This wasn't just greed. It was war. A sudden memory seared me. Michael's voice, weeks ago. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." T.S. At the time, it had sounded like a threat. Now I understood. He wasn't bluffing. He was already building the noose. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and relentless. I let them fall, but only for a moment, because as I stared at that crooked signature, a fire began to burn beneath the grief. They are willing to kill the family's honor, to steal my freedom. The words formed in my mind, steady and sharp. The sadness didn't vanish, but it hardened into something else, something stronger. I stood. My knees shook, but I stood. I folded the paper carefully, so carefully, as if it were evidence of a crime. Because it was. I fetched the ledger from its place on the shelf. I laid the forged document across it. 2 books of my life. One filled with sacrifices I had chosen, the other with chains they had tried to fasten around me. My hand hovered above both, shaking. Then I closed the ledger, shut the fake power of attorney inside, and pressed my palm down hard. "No more," I said aloud. My voice cracked but held. No more silence. No more waiting for mercy that will never come. The house seemed to listen. Even the clock's tick softened, as if giving me space. I wiped my cheeks, squared my shoulders. For the first time in months, my spine felt straight, my breath full. I whispered the words that sealed the moment. Words I knew I would carry into every step that followed. I will no longer be a silent victim. I will fight. Clara spread the papers across her desk like weapons laid out before battle. Bank receipts, pharmacy slips, locksmith invoices, statements from neighbors, all arranged in neat rows. The fluorescent light glinted on the stapled corners. "These are not just documents," she said, tapping the stack. "They are your armor." I nodded, though my throat was dry. My hands rested on my ledger, closed tight, as if the old book itself had finally become part of my defense. The room smelled faintly of rain on carpet. Outside, traffic hummed. Inside, my life lay catalogued in manila folders. Clara leaned forward. "They will try to twist everything, your age, your hesitation, even your love for your children. But remember, we don't fight with feelings alone. We fight with facts." I ran my finger down the margin of a statement Rosa had written. "I saw Michael at the Maple ATM, September 10, early morning. Margaret was not there. LS?" Her words steadied me more than my own heartbeat. At home, the preparation continued. My dining table disappeared under piles of photocopies. Each evening I sorted them into neat stacks. Bank, medical, neighbors, work history. Pages slid beneath my fingers like cards in a deck, each one a memory sharpened into proof. The ledger sat at the center, as if presiding over the order. For years, it had been my prison. Now, at last, it was becoming my sword. One night, Mr. Alvarez came by carrying a folder. He placed it gently on the table. "I wrote a statement," he said, his weathered hands clasped together, "about the mornings we talk, about how clear you are." I tried to thank him, but my voice broke. He only patted my shoulder. "You are not alone, Margaret. Don't forget that." Later, Rosa stopped in after closing her cafe, bringing a bag of almond biscotti. She watched me shuffle papers, her eyes fierce. "You are stronger than they know," she said. "They think silence means weakness. They will learn." Her words settled in me like iron. Still, the hardest part came alone. At night, I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection washed pale by the lamp. I held the affidavit in my hand and tried to read it aloud, as if the courtroom already surrounded me. The first time, my voice shook. "My name is Margaret Wilson, 78 years old. I..." The words dissolved. My throat closed. I saw not my face, but Michael's sneer, Anna's cold eyes. I lowered the page, ashamed. I tried again. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 78. I am not confused. Better, but still thin." I kept at it, night after night. Sometimes I recorded myself, pressing the little red button on an old tape recorder. The playback startled me, the tremor in my voice, the pauses heavy with fear. But each evening, the tremor lessened. Each night, the pauses shrank. On the fifth night, I looked into the mirror and saw not a trembling old woman, but a witness sharpening her blade. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 78 years old. I worked 40 years as a nurse. I paid every bill with my own hand. I am not incompetent. I am not incapable. I am here to protect what is mine." This time, the words rang steady. My reflection stared back with eyes bright, fierce. For the first time in months, I believed myself. One evening, my friend Helen came by. She listened quietly as I practiced, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, she asked softly, "Are you afraid?" I met her gaze. My chest tightened, but I answered honestly, "Yes, I'm afraid. But I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life as a shadow." Helen smiled, slow and sad. "Then you're ready." The preparation became a rhythm. Mornings at Clara's office, afternoons of paperwork, evenings in front of the mirror. Even the house seemed to change. The same walls that once echoed with loneliness now hummed with resolve. I remembered all the years of silence. The times I bit my tongue, wrote another check, told myself love would bloom from sacrifice. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table late at night, ledger open, tears falling quietly while I convinced myself this was what mothers do. But this time, it was different. This time, the ledger would not chain me, it would free me. I thought often of Battle of Knights sharpening swords, of soldiers sewing their banners. My battlefield would be the courthouse, my weapons paper and testimony. My banner, the simple truth that I am Margaret Wilson, and I refuse to be erased. The night before the first hearing, I laid everything out on the dining table. Folders stacked, receipts clipped, statements signed. I placed my clothes for the morning neatly over a chair. A gray skirt, a white blouse, the cardigan Rosa had mended for me. My shoes polished, my hairbrush set aside. I stood in front of the mirror one last time. My hands no longer shook. My name is Margaret Wilson, I said aloud, and for the first time, I am ready to say no to my own children. The words filled the room like light. I turned off the lamp, the house folding into darkness. My heart beat fast, but not from fear alone. From readiness. The courtroom smelled of varnish and cold air. Light from tall windows sliced into the room in pale rectangles. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted. The bailiff's voice rang out, low and solemn, and the judge entered in a black robe that swallowed his frame. I sat at the defendant's table beside Clara. My palms were damp against the polished wood. Every sound carried: the shuffle of papers, the scrape of a chair, the faint cough from the gallery. Above it all, the clock ticked, deliberate and merciless. When the gavel struck, the crack ricocheted through me. This was no longer the privacy of my living room. This was public. The battlefield had widened. Michael stood first, my son. His suit was pressed, his hair neatly combed. He looked every bit the dutiful man, ready to convince the world his mother had lost her mind. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm, practiced, "we are here because our mother, Margaret Wilson, is no longer able to manage her affairs responsibly. We only seek to protect her from herself." Protect. The word tasted like ash. He spoke of my age, my supposed confusion, the risks of mismanaging money. He held up the forged power of attorney, sliding it across the table with careful hands. "She signed this," he said firmly. "She has simply forgotten." My chest burned. Forgotten? No. Lied. Betrayed. Clara rose smoothly. Her voice was clear, slicing through the air. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that this so-called signature is a forgery. That my client is not only competent, but more meticulous with her affairs than most. And that this case is not about protection, but about theft." The battle began. The plaintiff's lawyer called their first witness, Mr. Dalton, the handyman. He shuffled forward, cap in hand, swore the oath, and spoke. "Mrs. Wilson forgot to pay me in May," he claimed. "She said she had, but she hadn't. I figured it was the age, you know." The lawyer nodded gravely. "So, in your opinion, her memory is failing?" Dalton hesitated. "Yes, that's what I think." Clara rose. "Mr. Dalton, here is a copy of Mrs. Amy Wilson's ledger. May 5th, $45. Paid to you for the screen repair. Is that your handwriting on the receipt taped here?" Dalton leaned forward, squinting. "Well, yes, that's my signature." "So the payment was made?" Dalton shifted in his seat. I suppose it was." "Thank you," Clara said. "No further questions." The judge made a note. A murmur rippled through the gallery. A woman from the thrift shop testified next. She claimed she saw me wandering aimlessly, looking lost, among second-hand coats. Clara cross-examined, holding up a receipt. "Mrs. Wilson, do you recall what you purchased that day?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "A blue cake stand for Rosa's bakery." Rosa herself stepped up from the benches, holding the stand in her arms. "She bought it from me, Your Honor," she said. "She wasn't lost. She was generous." The courtroom buzzed louder now. The opposing side called a nurse, who insisted I had mistaken her name several times at the hospital. Clara pounced. "Your Honor, here is the hospital's visitor log. On the day she claims, Margaret Wilson was not there. Her name does not appear. Instead, she was at her pharmacy at 10:30 a.m. Mrs. Chen, the pharmacist, is present today to confirm. Mrs. Chen stepped up, glasses sliding down her nose, voice steady. Mrs. Wilson corrected me when I misread her dosage that morning. Her memory is sharper than mine. The gavel struck once. Order. The tide shifted. Specialist. My doctor testified next. I administered a cognitive assessment last week, he said. Mrs. Wilson scored well above average for her age. She is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. Everyday life, Mr. Diehs. Alvarez, my neighbor, shuffled forward. We talk almost every morning by the roses. She tells me the headlines. She remembers more about politics than I do. Community voice. Rosa, from the cafe, stood again, voice fierce. I saw Michael at the ATM, withdrawing money. I saw Margaret buying bread from me 15 minutes later. She could not have been in two places at once. Each statement landed like a stone in a jar, clear, undeniable. Then came Michael again. He stood taller, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Our mother is confused, he insisted. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's being manipulated. By whom? Clara asked sharply. By neighbors, opportunists, people who want her money. Clara's hand flicked to the monitor. The ATM footage appeared. Michael, shoulders hunched, withdrawing cash. The timestamp glowed. A gasp ran through the room. Michael's face drained of color. The judge's gavel struck. Order. I stared at my son. He looked away. The knife twisted deeper in my chest, sharper than any document. He had chosen to stand there, against me. Finally, Clara turned to me. Mrs. Wilson? Will you address the court? I rose. My knees wobbled, but my voice did not. I looked at the judge, then at the crowded benches, then finally at Michael. I am 78 years old, I began. I am tired, yes. My back aches. My hair is white. But I am not incompetent. I held up the ledger. For 40 years, I worked as a nurse. I paid every bill with these hands. I raised my children with every penny and every sleepless night. This book holds my sacrifices, line after line of love. My voice sharpened. I am not confused. I am not unfit. I am not a shadow. I turned to Michael. I am not crazy. I was only foolish enough to believe that unconditional sacrifice would be rewarded with love. That was my madness. And today, I end it. Then I faced the judge again. My chest rose and fell. I stand here not to beg, not to defend, but to claim what has always been mine, my name, my dignity, and my freedom. Silence. The kind of silence that bends the air. The judge's voice cut through. Having heard the testimony, reviewed the evidence, and considered the credibility of all parties, this court finds that the petition is without merit. The allegations of incapacity are dismissed. The power of attorney is invalid. The assets remain under the control of Margaret Wilson. He lifted the gavel. Crack. The sound echoed like thunder and release. I sat back down slowly. My breath came in shallow waves, but my shoulders felt lighter than they had in years. Clara touched my hand once. Brief and steady. Michael slumped in his chair, face hidden. Anna whispered furiously beside him. But I no longer heard their voices. What I heard instead was the scrape of chairs as people rose, the murmur of neighbors who had doubted but now knew, the faint sob of Rosa in the gallery. I closed my eyes. For the first time in so long, tears did not sting. They tasted of salt, but also of something sweet. When I opened them, sunlight streamed through the high windows, striking the wooden floor in golden bands. I lifted my face into it. My lips curved, small, unsteady, but real. At last, I could breathe. When the courthouse doors closed behind me, the world outside felt strangely loud. Cars hissed along wet streets. Someone laughed across the square. Pigeons fluttered above the steps. Life went on, unshaken by the gavel that had just saved me. Clara walked me to her car, folder in hand, her words steady and practical. Next steps, official copies, follow-up filings. I nodded at all the right places, but my mind floated far from her sentences. I was still inside that courtroom, hearing the echo of my own declaration. By the time she dropped me off, the sky was darkening. My little house waited, quiet, a square of shadow at the end of the street. I turned the new key in the lock and stepped inside. Silence. The living room was just as I had left it. Couch cushions dented, the ledger still resting on the side table, the framed photographs of Michael and David grinning from their youth. They seemed to watch me now with a distance that stung. I lowered myself onto the sofa. The cushions sighed beneath me, and then the silence rushed back in. My shoulders sagged, all the air leaving me at once. I had won. The court had believed me. My name was intact, my accounts safe, my dignity recognized. And yet, the house felt emptier than ever. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling where a faint crack ran like a scar. The images replayed. Michael avoiding my eyes, Anna's tight mouth, the gavel striking. Again and again, like a film loop I couldn't shut off. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the groan of pipes, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking with merciless precision. Each hour, a new memory rose. Michael as a boy, running into my arms with scraped knees. David at graduation, eyes shining. Anna once thanking me softly for babysitting. Then the other memories, sharper. Michael's voice threatening me. The forged signature. The lies dressed up as testimony. I pressed my hands over my face. I won, I whispered into the dark. So why do I feel hollow? The truth throbbed in me. I had fought for freedom, and I had it now. But freedom had cost me the family I once thought was my whole life. Near dawn, I rose. My legs felt heavy, as if weighted by stone. I drifted to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The whistle cut through the silence, shrill and lonely. I poured the water over a tea bag, watching the dark swirls spread like ink in water. I carried the cup to the living room and sat again. Steam curled upward, fogging the photograph frames on the mantel. I sipped. The tea was hot, bitter. My eyes caught the ledger still on the table. I opened it, not to add numbers, not to measure sacrifice, but to close it once and for all. My hand pressed against the cover until it shut with a dull thud. I am more than this, I told the empty room. My voice sounded foreign, hoarse, but steady. The morning light crept through the curtains. Dust motes spun lazily in its path. I rose and opened the window. Cool air rushed in, smelling faintly of wet earth and roses from Alvarez's garden next door. I breathed it in. A small act, nothing grand, but it felt like the first step into a new world, one where I lived not for others, but for myself. I stood there a long time, watching the street wake up, Rosa carrying crates into her cafe, Alvarez watering his stubborn roses, life insisting on itself. I touched the sill, grounding myself. Yes, I won, I murmured. But what I lost cannot be measured in papers or property. The question pulsed in me, aching and unanswerable. I won the case. But what remains of me beyond myself? I closed the window softly. Later, as I placed the empty cup in the sink, a strange clarity washed over me. Victory is not joy. Freedom is not without cost. And sometimes, the taste of freedom is salt, sharp and stinging, like tears. I whispered the truth to myself, letting the words settle in the quiet house. Freedom sometimes carries the taste of tears. The sea air smells different from the city cleaner, sharper, salted with freedom. I open the balcony door of my small apartment, and the breeze rushes in, tugging at the curtains like playful hands. My bare feet press against cool wooden planks, and for the first time in years, I do not feel weighed down. I lift my coffee cup. The porcelain is light, almost weightless in my hand. Steam curls upward, delicate, nothing like the heavy telephone that once dragged my spirit to the ground. I take a sip. The taste is simple, strong, unburdened by bitterness. This is how freedom begins. Not with trumpets or applause, but with an ordinary morning that no longer hurts. A month after the trial, I sold the house. The walls had kept too many secrets, absorbed too many nights of silence and tears. I packed the photographs into a single box, but I left the old sofa behind. Let the next owner sit in it without knowing the weight it carried. The ledger I kept, not as a chain, but as a reminder. It sits now on my bookshelf, its worn cover closed forever. When I glance at it, I no longer feel shame. I feel proof. Proof that I survived giving everything away, and proof that I will never do so again. With the sale, I moved here, to a modest apartment overlooking the sea. I chose it myself. No child signed the lease. No one told me where I should live. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and the ink felt like a small coronation. I travel now. Not far, not grand, but enough. I have walked through narrow streets in Lisbon, watched lanterns rise in the night sky in Hanoi, and sat quietly on a park bench in Rome, feeding pigeons that strutted like kings. Every trip, I bring back a sketchbook. At first, the lines were shaky, hesitant, like my own voice when I practiced for court. But the more I draw, the steadier my hand becomes. A bowl of fruit, the curve of a stranger's smile, the horizon bleeding into the sea. On Thursdays, I take a painting class. The other students are younger, their laughter loud, their brushes bold. They call me Miss Margaret and ask for stories of my travels. I tell them bits and pieces, not about the trial, not about betrayal, but about the color of the sea in different light, about how lavender smells sweeter in Provence than in my garden at home. When I hold the brush, I am no longer the mother who waited for gratitude that never came. I am simply a woman with paint on her fingers, creating something that is mine alone. With the money I once guarded like oxygen, I now choose differently. I donate a portion each month to a foundation for children without families. I write the checks with steady hands, and for the first time in my life, giving does not feel like bleeding. It feels like planting. One afternoon, I received a letter from the foundation. A child had drawn a bright sun in yellow crayon, with a note, "Thank you, Margaret." I pinned it to my fridge. That small sun shines brighter than any thank you I ever begged for. Sometimes, I still dream of Michael and David. In the dreams, they are small again, barefoot, running across the yard, calling my name. I wake with tears, but not despair. The grief no longer suffocates. It lingers like a scar, reminding me where I have been. I do not chase reconciliation. If they return someday, it will be on terms I can live with. If not, I have already learned the harder truth. My life cannot wait for their permission. This morning, as I sipped my coffee, I remembered the night when the phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I see now how different this moment is. That call was a chain. This cup is a key. The motifs of my life have changed their meaning. The ledger is no longer a prison, but a record of endurance. The sofa I abandoned no longer traps me. Even the lock on my door, once a symbol of fear, is now the sound of safety when it clicks shut behind me. I used to think my story would end in silence, folded away in someone else's account book. Instead, it unfolds here, in sunlight and sea air, in brushstrokes and small acts of choice. I do not say this as advice. I have no sermons left to give. What I know is simple. Love without boundaries can become a cage. Freedom requires saying no, even to those you once gave everything to. I used to wait for thanks. I used to beg the universe for someone to recognize my sacrifices. But gratitude that must be begged is not gratitude at all. Now, I give because I want to. I live because I can. I step onto the balcony again. The sea stretches out before me, endless, glinting under the morning sun. I raise my cup, the light catching on the rim, and I smile, lightly, freely, without weight. I whisper to myself, the only audience I need. I am no longer waiting for anyone to repay me. I am the miracle of my own life. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this story. My name is Margaret Wilson, 78 years old, a woman once reduced to a walking wallet by her own children, yet still standing here, still breathing, still free. If you have stayed with me through every page, every wound, every moment of trembling and rising again, then you have not only read my life, you have carried it with me. And for that, I am deeply grateful. Now I want to turn to you. What would you do if one day, the very people you loved most began to treat you like a commodity, a bank, a thing to be drained instead of a soul to be cherished? Would you stay silent, hoping love might return if you endured long enough? Or would you draw the line and say, no, even at the cost of losing them? I cannot answer for you. I could barely answer for myself. But I know this: silence corrodes. Boundaries, painful as they are, can be the only bridge back to dignity. If my story touched you, if even one line echoed something in your own heart, I ask you, leave a comment. Share a fragment of your own journey. There is someone out there tonight, scrolling in the dark, clutching back tears, wondering if they have the right to stand up for themselves. Maybe your voice will be the hand they need. And if you feel this story carries weight, share it. Pass it along. You never know whose life might tilt toward courage because you pressed a single button. Do not forget to follow as well. Each week, I open another door into a true journey. Not fairy tales, not easy victories, but raw stories of loss, betrayal, and, most of all, the way we find the strength to rise. Perhaps next week's chapter will be the one that puts words to your own silent ache. I will not pretend this road is easy. Choosing freedom does not erase loneliness. Setting boundaries does not guarantee applause. But I stand as living proof that survival is possible, that transformation is real, that life after betrayal can still be rich, full, even beautiful. Once, I was a shadow in my own house. Now, I sit by the sea, sip my coffee, and feel the morning light on my face. And tonight, I leave you with this truth. The only truth I fought so hard to learn. I am no longer a shadow in anyone's house. I am the keeper of my own key to freedom. SDU